Hello everyone, this is Savannah Beckowski, Project Assistant at the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, I'd like to welcome you to our webinar entitled Water Audits as the first part of water loss control. To give you all of an idea of where others on the webinar are tuning in from, we have prepared this map. You can see that we have attendees spread all throughout the country. Thanks to you all for joining us today. This session is one of several webinars conducted by the Environmental Finance Center Network for the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project. The EFCN provides training and technical assistance to small public water systems in all 50 states and 5 territories to help local water systems achieve and maintain compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act. And here you can see the various centers that make up the Environmental Finance Center Network. You can see that we have centers spread all across the country. And here are the areas of expertise that the EFCN focuses on. Workshops, trainings, and direct technical assistance are provided on a variety of topics that include asset management, water loss reduction, accessing infrastructure financing programs, collaborating with other water systems, and managing drought. The EFCN also has a small systems blog. You can learn more about water finance and management through this blog. Blog posts feature lessons learned from our trainings and technical assistance, descriptions of available tools, and small system success stories. You will have an opportunity to subscribe to this blog at the end of the presentation. In addition to workshops, direct technical assistance, and webinars, as part of the Smart Management for Small Water Systems project, we have also created a table that lists the major funding sources for drinking water infrastructure projects in each state and territory. Here's how you can access those tables. From the EFCN homepage, go to the Resources tab and then click on Funding Sources by State. This will take you to a map of the country. If you click on the state you're interested in, you will find a PDF table of the relevant funding sources for drinking water infrastructure in that state. The table will look like the image on the left hand of the slide. For each funding program, it will include the name of the program, a short description, and contact information for someone who works in the program. Now at this point, I would like to turn the presentation over to our presenter. For our session today, we have Dawn Mall, Program Manager at the Southwest Environmental Finance Center. Dawn, welcome, and take it away.
Great, thanks, Savannah. All right, my screen should be up, and I wanted to thank everyone for attending today and participating. We're going to be focusing on water loss control today and how water audits play a role in water loss control. So I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have questions, feel free to type them into that questions box, and we will have time at the end of the session to address some of those questions. So when we look at the water balance, we want to look at it as both a blue and a green problem. So we'll talk about that for the remainder of today. So we'll start by saying at its core, we have water that enters our distribution system and ultimately water that comes out of our distribution somewhere. So not all of that water necessarily goes where we want it to, but all of the water does go somewhere. It doesn't disappear. It's not unaccounted for. It is going somewhere. So this water audit process will help us to address some of these questions. The next portion of the question is, we know that we're getting paid for that water, or we're not, because some of the water that leaves the system isn't water that's going through a meter and that we're actually generating revenue with. So ultimately, it's a blue problem and a green problem in the sense that we have water that isn't going where we want it to, and we have money that we're not generating, revenue that we're missing out on. So we need a way to help us estimate that amount of water that's going out to places that we don't want it to be going, and how much money we're not generating because of that. And that answer can come about through the water balance or the water audit process. So if we want to look at the water balance, we want to start with system inputs. So if we look at system inputs, we either have water that we produce, whether it's groundwater or surface water or goody water, volume from our own sources. That's our system input. Or we import water, we purchase water, we buy it from another entity, or we have some combination mixture of the two. Ultimately, those values equal our system inputs. That's where we start. That's what will determine answers throughout the course of the water audit. So these numbers from the very beginning are very important to have good information about. So if we look at system inputs, those system inputs go to our system, or we export them to another system, or we have some combination. So we know that when we export to another system, that's ultimately water that's making money for us. The question is more about the water that we supply to our system. So that water that we supply to our system either generates revenue or it doesn't. So you may have a large amount of water that generates revenue, that green box, and a small amount that doesn't. And we call that water that doesn't generate any revenue, we call it non-revenue water. Or you may be about half and half, or you may have a lot of non-revenue water and very little revenue water. You could be anywhere in between any of these boxes, and that's acceptable at this point in time, but understanding where you're at is really the first step in making some improvements and making that green box bigger than that red box. So we want to make sure that no matter where you fall in this picture, that you understand that if you're a utility that's supplying water to a distribution system, ultimately you will have some water that's non-revenue water. It doesn't matter how tight your system is. It doesn't matter how new your system is. Every water utility is going to have some amount of non-revenue water. And the goal is to reduce how much of it is red and increase how much of it is green so that we're generating as much revenue as possible. So when we look at the revenue water, we have a couple of different types of revenue water. So we're going to look at the billed and authorized water. So we have what's billed and metered, and this is where our customers typically should fall. They should be receiving a bill regularly. We should be reading their meters regularly. This is the majority of our revenue. Or we might have some customers that are billed but do not have a meter. So we would bill them based on a flat fee and not by reading a meter. So we don't really know how much water they're using exactly, or we can have a combination of the two where we have some that are metered and some that are not metered. But in both cases, we're sending the customers a bill and we've authorized the use of this water. Then if we change the focus from the revenue water to the non-revenue water, there are several different types of categories for non-revenue water. So the three main components of non-revenue water include the authorized unbilled, the second is the theft and errors, and the third one is our real losses. So we can look at those a little bit deeper. Each of those can be broken down into further subcategories. So if we look at authorized unbilled, we have a few areas here that falls into. We have unbilled but metered. So examples of these would be customers that have a meter in place. We're telling them that they're allowed to use the water. We know they're using the water, but we're not billing them. So if you think about your system in places where there might be users like this, typically it's something like a government building or a community park that we're watering or a swimming pool that we're filling up for the community. The water is going through a meter. You can read the meter, but ultimately you don't send them a bill at the end of the billing period, whether it's a month or a quarter or however you bill. Then we have unbilled and unmetered consumption. So examples of this would be when you flush your water system for water quality, flushing the hydrants, firefighting, street sweeping, sewer cleaning, other things that aren't really permanent use that you may have a temporary meter on, but it's not something that you're going out and reading as part of your monthly process. So again, it's allowed, it's authorized, but they're not receiving a bill, and typically they're not metered. And then this next category of theft and errors, theft is just that, people that are stealing water from your utility. People are very creative. There's lots of ways that they do it. They might tamper with the meter. They might take the meter out. They might put the meter in backwards. They might connect illegally to your pipes, or they might be stealing water from the hydrants without paying for it. So theft falls into non-revenue water. And then we have customer meter errors. So this is where you do have a customer meter, but the meter maybe is not as accurate as it could be. So you're not reading the full amount of water that's going through the meter, or you don't have the right type of meter in place. So maybe you're not reading low flows on those meters, things like that. And finally, in this category, we have systematic data errors. This is anything that you have that's related to how you manage your data. So for example, if you take a manual reading, someone writes something down by hand and then gives that information to someone else who puts it into a computer, and then the computer has a program that takes that information and calculates a bill or calculates use. And in this process of transferring information from person to person and paper, handwritten to computer process, you may have had a typo, or it may have generated some other error. Anything like this is systematic data errors. And then finally, we get to our real losses. This is leaks. Leaks from our mains, leaks from our service lines, and any type of overflow or leak at our storage tank. So all of these classify our non-revenue water. So when we start looking at these areas, there's a couple of things about terminology that we want to make sure that you're aware of. So again, when we talk about our theft and errors, we're talking about theft, we're talking about customer meter errors, and we're talking about systematic data handling errors. All of this is termed apparent losses. And the reason that we call it apparent losses is it actually looks like a physical loss. It looks like water leaking from pipes, but it actually isn't a physical loss. It's reaching a customer. It goes to an end user. It's not physically being lost from the system through a leak or a crack or a break, but the volumes aren't being counted because of theft, or because we don't know how inaccurate our meters are, things of that nature. So this type of water could produce revenue, but is not, because we don't have the ability to count it right now. So it's apparent losses. And this type of water, when we're looking at how much is it costing us or what is it worth, we value it at the same price that we charge our customers. So our customer retail rate is used to value this water. And the reason is because, again, someone could theoretically have paid for this water. So this water has the potential to generate revenue, but currently is not. And then when we get to our leaks, our main leaks, our service line leaks, and our overflows, those are our real losses. Those are physical losses. The water is not reaching a customer. It's leaking out of the system before it gets to a customer. We don't have a good way of measuring real losses. And again, this water doesn't have the ability to generate revenue. It's not actually reaching a customer, so we can't actually sell it. So when we look at real losses, we value real losses differently. We value them at the price that it costs us to produce the water, not at the price that we charge our customers. So in this case, we would want to look at things like energy and the chemical costs that go into producing the water. That's our variable production rate. And we look at it in dollars per million gallons that it costs to create that water. So since we can't charge the customers for this directly, we know that they're paying for it indirectly anyway. So we want to have a cost associated with it, but not the rate that we charge our customers. So now that we understand all of the parts of our water audit and where water could be going, we can look at this big picture that is put together in a slightly different order. So we start again with that very important first number of volume from owned sources and imported water if we have any. Those two combined are our system inputs. That's everything going in. From our system inputs, we know that we can export water or supply water to our system. From our system, we then have water that's authorized to be consumed, and we have water losses. So when we look at our authorized consumption, again, we have that billed authorized consumption. So this is anybody that's receiving a bill for using water, and it can be water exported, it can be billed and metered, or it can be billed but not metered. That generates revenue. That's our revenue water. This is the only area in the balance that is revenue water. Then we have our unbilled authorized consumption. So no one's paying for the water, but they have been authorized to use it. And we have both metered and unmetered categories here. Then we get to those apparent losses. That's our unauthorized consumption. That's customer metering error and the systematic data handling errors. And finally, we have those real losses. And again, those can be mainline leaks, service line leaks, or storage tank leaks. All of that is our non-revenue water. So when we're looking for areas, places where we're not generating revenue, there's a lot more possibility to find water in these categories than in our revenue water. So that's why it's so important to understand where the water is going and how it's classified. If you look at the water balance, you can see that all of these columns are the same height. And that has great importance to us. It matters to us because we said earlier that we don't have the ability to measure those real losses down in the bottom red box there. We can't measure those, but if we know that all of these columns are equal and we know the values in all but one of the boxes, of course we can figure out what the real losses are by doing a quick subtraction. So that's why the water balance benefits us. It helps us to determine volumes for areas that we cannot measure. So if we want the water balance to help us estimate the water that's going out where we don't want it to go and the revenue that we're not getting, and we know that the water balance can help us, one option would be to use this water balance and to start putting the volumes, the flows directly into each category and to try to start doing the math to figure out what everything is and where everything goes. But that could get a little bit complicated. So there is an easier way to go about this, and that is AWWA's Water Audit software tool. And this is a free tool available on AWWA's website. The web address is down in the bottom corner of the slide where you can go to get the audit software. And you can find the latest version there. And you do have to have Excel, Microsoft Excel, to be able to run the program. Otherwise, it's free and it's easily accessible. So whenever you first see the software, sometimes it feels a little overwhelming, so we want to remind you or let you know that it's not as scary as it looks. It's not as bad as it looks when you start the software. There are clear instructions, and the white boxes are the only places that you can input information. The yellow boxes are all calculations that are done for you. Some of the items probably aren't going to apply to your water system. For example, if you don't import any water, you won't have to fill in that box. If you don't export any water, you won't have to fill in that box. So it really cuts down on the amount of data that you have to input. And as you go through this process, there's an added benefit. You actually learn an awful lot about your system by doing the audit, gathering the information, and going through putting the information into the audit. So once you've decided that you're ready to get started with the water audit process, you have to set some parameters for the process. So the first is deciding what area the audit's going to entail. So you have to establish some boundaries for the audit. It can be your entire system. It can include all of your inputs and outputs, or it can be a portion of your system. If you are going to look at portions of your system, you have to make sure that you have the ability to account for all of the flows into that area and all of the flows out of that area. So things are metered, that you have a way to account for everything entering and leaving that area. So oftentimes this works well for regional systems where multiple systems have joined together and have become one system. So there's one kind of entry and exit for each regional entity. So you can do a water audit for the whole system, or you can do it for each entity that's part of the system. You also have to set a time period. So for the AWWA audit, we want to look at a full year worth of information. It's not intended to be used for a snapshot in time or a month or a quarter even. So you want to make sure that you're looking at a full year's worth of data. This helps us overcome some of the issues about the amount of water that's stored in the pipes and in the storage tanks. As we look over the course of the year, that water should have come and gone, so we don't have to adjust for that as frequently. And you can decide if you want it to be the calendar year or the fiscal year. So you get to pick and enter start date and end date if you choose fiscal year. So it can be July 1st, it could be October 1st, or you can put calendar year. So any date range really works as long as it's a full year. And then you put in your units of measure you get to pick. Again, your choice, millions of gallons, megaliters, or acre feet. Almost always in the U.S. we're using millions of gallons, but there are options if you tend to measure in acre feet. We see that sometimes in our more arid southwest climate, but not always. So you have the choice. Just make sure that once you've picked a unit, that you use that unit consistently throughout the audit. So it might mean converting. It might mean, having a check afterwards to make sure that you've got everything in the correct units. And finally, you have to start assembling your records and your data. So your data will fit into 5 categories. We're going to look at water supplied. So this is going to be primarily your master meters. How much water are you putting into the distribution system? That should come from master meters at the wells, or at the filter plant, or at the treatment facility. And then you're going to be looking at the water that you deliver to customers. So this will be your customer meter reads. This will be your billing information, and estimates if you do not have meters. Then you're going to be asked some system characteristics, information about pipe length, average system pressure, things like that. And then financial information. They're going to want to know the financial information to help you calculate values for different aspects of water and where it's going. And then other information that you may want to collect that's not directly tied to the audit process but is very helpful in the long run are things like break records. So if you have records anytime you've had a repair, keeping that information on leaks, on breaks, and knowing when they're occurring, how they're occurring, where they're occurring, that kind of information is very helpful in the real loss, in understanding real losses and dealing with real losses, even though it's not information that you're going to directly enter into the water loss audit software. So a few things that we think are worth sharing, important considerations when you get started with a water audit and you go through the process of looking at your data. You need to know and remember that your data wasn't generated for the purpose of completing a water audit. especially the data that comes out of your billing system. Your billing system was intended to create bills, and it likely does that really well, but it may not track information that you need for water audits as precisely as you would like. So for example, if you had a customer at a resident on a meter and they moved out in June and you're running on the calendar year, and so now you have a new customer coming in and the meter readings are starting for a new customer in July. The billing software may not maintain the history of the customer before, so you lose that usage from January through June for the previous resident, and now you only have from July on. So you have to understand your billing software and where it's designed to do its job and not the water audit data collection, and figure out how you can best address that down the road. Also, no matter what you do, there's going to be some inconsistencies, some anomalies, some issues, some concerns with your data, and you may have to address some of those before you can enter information into the software. Or over time, you may be able to improve upon that, investigate those issues, see where the problems are, and you may not even know you have problems initially until you get into this process. So taking the time to dig into those issues and figuring out how to address them will be part of the learning process of going through the water audit. And then over time, you're allowed to change your data. You're allowed to change the way that you collect your data. You may find that it's best to keep a spreadsheet separate from the billing software for certain customer categories, or to track firefighting use in a way that's not been done before, things like that. So as long as you continue to improve the process, it doesn't matter if it takes a year or 2 years or 5 years, as long as you're moving forward and you're making it easier in the future and you're making it more accurate in the future. So just be prepared to improve over time, and to learn about your system as you go through the process. As you're collecting your data, think about how it's collected. Where is it stored? Is it written down by hand? Is it stored electronically? Who has access to that data? Not always does the person completing the audit have access to all of the information they need. So you have to build a relationship with maybe the department that runs your billing system, or with the operator that keeps paper records in the pump house, to collect the information that you need and to understand it, interpret it, and get it entered into the software correctly. So understand where the data is at, who has access to it, and start to build those relationships. So now that we've talked about the data and what you have to have, you may be thinking to yourself that you don't have good enough data, or that you don't know enough about what's going on in your system, that you could really do a good water audit. And we disagree with that. We think that, yes, you really can do a water audit no matter where you're at in this process. If you know very little about the system, that's okay. If you don't start entering the data now, you don't know what you don't know. So you've got to start the process with what you have. Don't wait and say, well, when I get better data, because when is that going to be? How is that going to happen? Starting the process now will help you to develop good data over time. So we think that it's best to start with what you've got and improve over the years. So now we're going to take a closer look at just how the water audit software works. The place to start is the first tab, the instructions tab. I think human nature says instructions are the tool of last resort, but in the case of the water audit, you really should start on the instructions tab. So when you click on that instructions tab, there are several boxes for you to fill in. First is just the contact information, the system information, the basic information, PWS ID, those types of things. Then it asks for you to pick your year. Are you going to select calendar year or fiscal year? If you select calendar year, the start and end date go away. If you pick fiscal year, then you enter your start and end date. Then it's going to ask you to select your units. So again, millions of gallons, acre feet, or megaliters are your choices. So you make that selection. You don't want to skip this information because if you let it sit at its default, it may not be what you intended it to be, or it may not let you start at all if that box is blank. So make sure you start on the instructions page, you fill in the information here. This is just an example of what a completed instruction page would look like. It tells you what the colors mean, what the boxes do on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side is your information. So next we have to develop our inputs. So this is where we will put all of the data about what's going on with our system. So the reporting worksheet is the second tab. This is where all of the data inputs go. And again, the yellow boxes you cannot input data into. They're calculated for you. So it's just the white boxes where you put your data. So we're going to start with that volume from own sources information, water imported, and water exported. So this is where you would look at master meter data. You would know how much you're supplying to the system. So in this case, it was selected to use millions of gallons per year. So if your system had 32 million gallons from the wells, and that's your only source, you would put 32 in that box. If you don't import water or you don't export water, you would just leave those boxes blank. You don't have to put anything in them. From there, you want to enter your master meter errors. So this is any error that the meters are reading, the volumes that we might supply. So these could be the meters that are on our wells or our surface water sources. They would also be meters for any water that we import or purchase and any water that we export. You want to note that you can only put one number in. So if you have multiple master meters and multiple errors, you have to do a flow weighted average. And if you're not familiar with how to do the math for a flow weighted average, there is a little tool on our website that will help you do that math very quickly and easily. So make sure that you are aware that that tool is available and that you can only put one number in. Also, it's important to note that there are two toggle buttons here. So you can either pick the left toggle button and enter a percentage, or you can select the right toggle button and you can enter a value in millions of gallons per year. And it's also, meters can overread or underread. So if you have a meter that is under registering, you want to enter a negative value. And if it's over registering, you want to put in a positive value. So that information is very important, and adjust your total water supplied number. So you can see here an example where the meter's read 16.897 million gallons per year, but the meter was under registering by 5.05%. So the software does the calculation for you in the bottom yellow box and shows that the actual water supplied was 17.795 million gallons. So it does the adjustment based on your information for meter error and meter adjustments. Once you've completed entering all of those values, if you have all three, volumes from own sources, water imported, water exported, you have meter errors for all three of those, the software does all of the math and corrects for all of the meter readings to calculate your total water supplied. So you can see there in the yellow box the calculations are done for you. The next step is to enter our customer data. So in the customer data section, we're going to put in the billed meter data. And this is all of the data for all of the water that we provide to customers that run through meters. and the customer gets a bill. So hopefully that data comes from your billing software, and you can get information for the total amount of water that passed through those meters for the year, and then you'll enter any billed unmetered data. So in this case, it's customers that are paying a flat fee but don't have a meter. To determine that information, you will have to estimate that value in some way. So you'll have to use criteria from textbooks or other resources on the average customer use, and then estimate that over the course of the year to figure out how much water to put into that box. So if you don't have meters, clearly the data is going to be less accurate because you're estimating rather than reading a meter. So hopefully most of your customers are metered, but in the case that you don't, there's still a location to estimate that value. And then you're going to put in unbilled but metered. So these are the customers that you can read the meter, but they're not getting a bill. So hopefully in your billing software, there's the ability to track this even though it doesn't generate a bill. So it would have some kind of separate code or a way to designate not to generate a bill but to track the volume. If not, this is where you would want to start tracking it in a separate software or spreadsheet or something similar. And then if you notice, the unbilled, unmetered box is yellow, meaning you can't type a number in there. So you have two choices on how to handle that just to the right. I'm going to kind of zoom in on that there. You can see that you can pick to have a percentage, or you can toggle to have a value. If you pick the percentage, it's a default percentage that AWWA has supplied based on their research and information available. So you can leave it at the default percentage of 1.25. This is very typical when we're first getting started. It's not billed, it's not metered. We don't have a good way to estimate it to start. So we use the default value. But over time, maybe you start to track how much flushing you're doing and the time of the flush, the length of time, and you can estimate the gallons per minute for the flush. Or you can use temporary meters and get an estimate for what that value would be. Or the fire department starts to track fire flow, and then you can enter that value in. But when you're just getting started, chances are you don't have good information. So there's a default value to start with. But you can pick, you can toggle. If you pick the 1.25%, the software does the math for you and puts it in there. If you type a value in, as you can see in the bottom box, it just copies that value right over. Then we move on to our apparent losses. So in the case of apparent losses, there's three things. If you remember, we have the unauthorized consumption or theft. We have the customer meter errors, and we have the systematic data handling errors. So there are, again, all yellow boxes here, so you have to go over to the right and decide if you want to use a percentage or if you want to toggle to the values. The default percentages provided for theft are 0.25% and also for systematic data handling errors. The percentage box for customer metering inaccuracy is red. This is the only place in the software that you have a red box, and you can enter anything less than 10%. So the software does give you some calculation concerns if you enter more than 10% there. So you have three choices for percentage or for value. Two of those percentages are default. You can't change them. One of them you can. So that gives you your apparent loss information. Based on all of those inputs that we've put in, the software will calculate for us our non-revenue water. So it's based on all of those inputs in yellow. It calculates the non-revenue water. It will also calculate for us the authorized consumption. So this is the total authorized consumption that we've put in or we've tallied up. It will tell us what the apparent losses are, and it will calculate our real losses. And this is where the math comes in, where those columns are all the same size in the water balance, and you do the simple subtraction. So we calculate those real losses by taking our water losses minus our apparent losses. After we go through the usage information, we're asked to input some small amount of information about the system that's not directly related to calculating the water loss, but they're metrics that help determine some information. So you're asked for information on the length of mains, the number of active and inactive service connections, the location of your customer meters or curb stops, and it gives you a couple of examples if you're uncertain, so you can look at the examples to figure that out if you need help. The length of the customer service lines, if the curb stops aren't at the property boundary. If they are, then that box you don't have to fill in, it goes away. And then the average operating pressure. So most of the data is not terribly difficult to come by. If you have a system with lots of pressure zones or a more complex system, determining your average operating pressure might be a little bit more difficult. But you can start with a good kind of assumption and then build it from there, collecting data over time on pressures. Or you can use the pressure at the kind of the middle range and then grow from there. So it's kind of up to you, and the quality of the data will improve over time, and that's important as we move through the process. So how we track that, we will cover here in just a little bit. Our final inputs on the spreadsheet are the financial ones, and this is where the information that we put in is going to be used to value our real losses and our apparent losses. So we need to know a couple of things. One is the total cost for us to operate the utility for the year, and that's in dollars per year. Then we have that customer retail unit cost. This is dollars per 1,000 gallons, and that's what we charge the customers. We want to make sure that this amount doesn't include any base bill. This is a number that's looking at dollars per 1,000 that you charge your customers. And again, you can only put one number in here. So if you have a rate structure with more than one rate, you have to do a little bit of math to determine your flow-weighted residential and non-residential averages. It's not terrible math, and again, there is a tool available that can help you with that if you have a concern about doing it correctly. Also, we're available to help systems with that at any point in time. And then we have to know our variable production costs. This is what we talked about before. This values our real losses. This is the dollars per million gallons. And typically it's our energy and chemical costs divided by the total millions of gallons we produce. There's a tab for comments, and we cannot stress enough how valuable this tab is. So you will likely not be coming back to this every day, every week, every month. So remembering why you did, what you estimated can be a bit difficult. So having this comments section is very helpful. Make as many notes as you can. Use it as much as possible. It will help you and only you in the end. And then it's important to know that that data that you're putting in isn't going to be completely accurate. So as you're going through the process, it may not give you accurate results if we're not putting in completely accurate information. So how do we track that? How do we determine if the audit results are reliable? Well, the system has built into it this data validity score or data grades. So you can rank your information on how accurate it is. So to see the data grade rankings, you can hover your cursor over the little red triangle in the corner of the data grade score, and a box will pop up that shows you what those categories are, and you can pick and then input the number straight into the system. However, we find that those pop-up boxes can be a little bit difficult to read. If your screen's not big enough, or you aren't scrolled in just the right place, or you happen to slip your mouse off of that little triangle, the box just disappears. So we've created just tables that you can use to see what each of those data validity scores means, and you can download this from our website at southwestefc.unm.edu down at the bottom of the screen there. From that website, you will want to click on the water loss control option, and then once you get to water loss control, you'll want to click on the resources tab, and from there you can download any of the tools that we have available. But for the data grading, there's a little text that says downloaded here, and you just click right on that word here, and they're accessible to you to print out and use anytime that you would like. So it's important to note that there's one sheet for every data input. So if you don't have, for example, any volume exported, you wouldn't need that table. You can skip that sheet. Every one of the data grade tables is related to practices, policies, procedures, and occasionally results. So you're going to be looking at certain things. So for example, for volume from own sources, it's related to the three things listed here: percent of water production sources metered, meter accuracy testing, electronic calibration, and accuracy of the meter. And you score yourself from 1 to 10. So when you're scoring yourself, it's important to know that you can check the box only if you meet or exceed the criteria in the box. So pick a starting point. It doesn't have to be 1. It can be 5. It can be 6, wherever you want to start. It can be 10, and you work your way down, whatever makes sense to you. But if you meet or exceed the criteria, you can check the box. And sometimes the wording makes it a little bit uncertain, but just know that if you are greater than what it says, then you can check the box and move on to the next higher number. The grades always have conditions between. So in this case, you could check all of the boxes in 2, and you could check one of the boxes in 4. So your grade would be a 3, because you are not quite yet to 4, but you've exceeded all of 2. So you're in the in-between section of number 3. So go through, check the boxes, see when you can't check a box any longer, and then go to the number right below that, and that's your data grade or your score. Enter those in to the data grade boxes to the left of each of the data entry points, and then you will have the ability to look at the validity of your information. So the most important thing to remember about data grades is to be honest. If we have a tendency to want to be the best possible, and in this case, it only hurts us if we're deceiving ourselves. So make sure that your data grades are accurate, reflect your system. Don't go in and put 10s in everywhere. It will throw you off. It will tell you that you're doing things that you're not, and that you're ready to do things that possibly will lead you down the wrong path. So being honest will help you determine what to do next. If you miss any of your data grades, there will be a message at the bottom of the screen that tells you how many you still need to fill in. You can go back up and search for the ones that are missing and fill those in. And then once you get them all filled in, you get a data validity score. So your score shows up, and then down at the bottom of the screen, you also get areas for attention to increase those validity scores. Almost always, volume from own sources is going to be listed there unless your data scores are very high in that category. And the reason being is volume from own sources is what everything else is based upon. That's that first column. So if it's not as accurate as possible, we're starting off with less valid or less accurate information. So the scores that we put in are not weighted equally throughout the process, so just be aware that it gives you areas to work on. So you get your score. What does it mean? What response should you have? Well, typically we recommend that if the score is less than 50, that you focus on improving your data. You work on improving those validity scores and improving the quality of the data that you're using. And if it's above 50, then you probably want to continue to work on your quality of your data, but also you can start to look at the results of the audit and maybe take some next steps. So the results of the water audit provide three things. It provides the blue part of the problem, the volumes, where's the water going, particularly the non-revenue water. It provides you the green answer of how much is that water worth, what's the non-revenue water based on dollars. And then finally, it gives us that validity score so that we have confidence in our data to move forward, or we know we need to continue to work on the quality of our data. So results of the audit show up in a few of the tabs. So here is the results page for performance indicators. We get information on apparent losses and real losses. We get financial metrics. We get a lot of information on this page that can help us understand what our water loss information is, what our non-revenue water information is. We also have a dashboard that shows us graphically where the water is going. So the bar on the right is that red and green is non-revenue water and revenue water. So here we've got almost a 50-50, probably a 45-55 split. We also get a chance to look at non-revenue water in costs and in volume. So you can toggle between the two and see your results. So you can see here this system has a situation where their customer metering inaccuracies are causing the highest cost of non-revenue water, but their real losses are the highest volume. So they have some decisions to make about what they want to address first, what's more important to them. So this graphic can be very helpful in picking next steps. You also get the completed water balance. So we said earlier you could try to put all those numbers in, but it would be difficult. So since the software helps you and does some of the math for you, it very quickly and easily generates this water balance for you. So now that you know what to do about your green problem, your blue problem, and you have confidence in moving forward, what are your next steps? There's a lot of different things that you can do. So there's not usually one tool that's going to address all of your non-revenue water concerns. There are a variety of pieces. So we developed this toolbox. It gives you some ideas of what kind of tools you could use to address different types of water loss and what the cost range would be. So on the left-hand side, it talks about what kind of non-revenue water it addresses. In the middle, what the tool is that you would need. And then on the right, what the cost range is. And those go from low to high. So at the top of the toolbox are the validity-based tools. Then we have our authorized unbilled usage tools. Then the apparent loss tools. And finally, the real loss tools at the bottom. So the real benefits of going through this process are understanding your system, and there are, of course, cost benefits to doing the water audit. So when you think about what things you can do at your own facility based on what we talked about today, things like downloading the water audit software, becoming familiar with how it works, start gathering your data. You can start to enter that data and know if your quality is good or not so good and where you need to improve. Just gather the data and do as much as you can at your own system. And just some food for thought here. We want to make sure that you know that Don't let what you can't do stop you from doing what you can. So maybe you can't do everything you'd like. Maybe you have to do some big estimates at the beginning. That's all okay. Use those comments fields. Go through the process the first time, and then it will get better over time. If you have questions about the water audit software, you would like some help with it, here is my contact information on the right. My name is Dawn Nall, and my director of the Southwest EFC is Heather Himmelberger. Her information is listed here as well. So feel free to reach out to us. We've got just a couple of minutes for some questions, if any have come in.
Yes, a few questions did come in. And for any questions that we don't get to right now, we will be following up with you offline via email. So the first question is, an attendee asked if can the data you enter into the water audit software program and the results generated be accessed by any other unauthorized individuals or entities other than those who entered and determined the data?
The program is downloaded and stored locally on your machine. So the answer would be dependent upon the security at your own utility. But it's not stored nationally. It's not, unless you choose to share it. So ultimately, the information is as secure as any other information within your own utility would be.
Thank you. And the next question we received is, what is a typical source of information on meter inaccuracies?
So to determine meter inaccuracies, you have to have those meters tested. So for master meters, typically you're going to outsource that work. Unless you're a large utility with the ability to do that type of testing in-house, typically you're going to have someone come in and look at your meters and test those meters, both for the meter itself, is the meter accurate, and then is the meter accurate the way that it's installed. Unfortunately, sometimes our meters are not installed properly, which can cause them to read inaccurately. Even though the meter's perfectly good, the installation is causing problems. So an outside group will typically do that work. For residential meters, they can be bench tested if you've got the capabilities to bench test and determine accuracy for those. And of course, we wouldn't encourage you to pull all of your meters and bench test them. We would encourage you to look at a percentage of them that represents the distribution system widespread. So don't do all of the meters on Main Street. Do one on Main Street, and one on 5th Street, and one on Orange Street, and so on and so forth. And then also a good distribution of age. So if some of your meters were installed 10 years ago and some were installed 5 years ago, make sure that you get a good mix of those as well.
Thank you, Dawn. So we are coming up on the 1 o'clock hour. Do you think we have time for one more, or would you like me to wrap it up?
Let's go ahead and do one more.
You've got it. So an attendee asked, is customer metering inaccuracies always a positive percentage?
The answer is no. So let's see if I can flip back through these slides real quick. But the answer is no. We want to make sure that we're entering the right values for whether we're under reading or over reading. I think it's one more. There we go. So down at the bottom here, negative values if the meter under registers, positive values if it over registers. So that's a very important to be aware of. Very good question. So thank you very much.
All right. So we have come up on our 1 o'clock Eastern, 12 o'clock Central Time. So before we wrap up, I do have 2 more quick polling questions for attendees on the call. And the first one is if you are interested in subscribing to the Environmental Finance Center blog. If you're unsure about the blog or do not have the opportunity to submit your polling answer today, you can sign up for the blog on the efcnetwork.org website. I'm getting ready to close that poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, are you interested in receiving in-depth technical assistance if you're a small water system? Again, if you're unsure about in-depth technical assistance or would like to learn more, you can review the technical assistance form on the efcnetwork.org website. And I'm getting ready to close that poll in 3, 2, 1. And lastly, in the chat box, there is a link to a survey. If you could just take 5 minutes out of your day today to let us know how today's session went, that would be wonderful. And to all the attendees that submitted questions but did not have them answered, we will be following up with you offline via email, and you will be receiving a follow-up email that details how to access the PowerPoint and recording of this session. So Dawn, I just want to thank you for providing your expertise today on water audits and water loss control. And I want to thank all the attendees that joined us today. Dawn, can I throw it back to you for any additional closing comments?
Just let us know if you've got questions. We'd be happy to help. And thank you for attending today. I hope that you found it worthwhile.
Have a great afternoon, everyone. Bye-bye.